Welcome to Make Your Money Matter with Brad Barrett, the show that aims to change the way you think about wealth management. Brad is a financial advisor, established radio host, and author of Retire Right. He is a managing director and partner at One Capital Management, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm managing over $4 billion for clients across the nation. Brad and his team are dedicated to helping clients protect and preserve their assets so they can reach their investment and retirement goals. And now, your host of Make Your Money Matter, Brad Barrett.
Welcome in to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management, and our show aims to help you create a better relationship with your money. And today on the show, we're going to talk about how to know if your money is fulfilling its primary purpose. We're going to talk about achieving financial confidence, and really it starts with two questions I'm going to pose today that I think are really important. We're also going to talk about context and deceiving. Because I think in this world right now with media and everything going on, there's a lot of deceiving going on that's actually not really truth. And so I think when it comes to our money, it's important to debunk some of these things and just put it into the right light. But before we get started, make sure to go to our website at One Capital Management. You can download and subscribe through our media tab there to our show. You can also download the podcast on Spotify or SoundCloud or the Apple iTunes app or Google Podcasts. And do us a favor. Leave us a review, leave us a comment. It helps us share the message. It also helps us to better the show for anyone watching and listening. We want to thank everybody for your support and your weekly listening. And with that, let's get started. You know, in thinking about this week's show, I was rereading a book recently called the Screwtape Letters. If you haven't read this book, it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. Has nothing to do with money per se, but there is a lot of undertones in it. That has a lot to do with what I see as many of my clients' perception or purpose around money. And this book is very interesting. It's written by C.S. Lewis, the same author who did Chronicles of Narnia. And it's an interesting book where he writes as if he's the devil, as if he's Lucifer, right? And he's writing letters revealing all of the devil's secrets and tactics on how basically to deceive the world. And one of the points that he reveals, if you will, is that he gets people so focused on horrible events happening in another part of the world that's completely out of their control, where they get so consumed and blinded by it that they miss what they actually can control or help around them. And more than anything, I wanted to share, with what's going on this year in the Middle East, recently in the past few months, just this past couple years, really with, the other war we were dealing with, the pandemic over the past couple years. I see so much of this playing out in our real world, don't you? And we have the news and our phones right in our hands where we can scroll and consume articles and news updates, basically instantly from all over the world. Now, I want to share something. Obviously, and it's important to be aware, all right? Definitely. It's important to help however we can. And of course, never completely ignore it. But it's also important to protect your peace of mind. A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with a client, and we were talking about quantifying and, value when it comes to services, value of an advisor. I shared this on the episode a couple weeks ago as well. And one of the big, on the top of like every one of my clients' lists, and I'm proud to say this, and anyone who ever worked with an advisor should have this on the top of their list, the unquantifiable value, right? There's quantifiable value in terms of like rate of return, simple stuff like returning phone calls, getting things done when it said it's going to get done, building a plan, following up on that plan, so on and so forth. Like those are quantifiable events, all good. The unquantifiable stuff, the biggest one on there was peace of mind. Now, I spoke about this again on our show, and you can look back on that when it comes to the value of an advisor, but I'm bringing it up because I think all of us can control our peace of mind by doing something very simple. And it's something I've said, and a pastor said this to me a long time ago, and I remember it. You know the one place in this expensive world that we can stay for free? Our lane. As soon as we start looking over our shoulder, looking over the other lane and seeing what Billy has over there or what Joanne has over there, and we're like, oh man, I wish I had that or this and that. It could be anything, right? That's immediately, this is what the Screwtape Letters talks about. It's literally his recipe and how he deceives us and gets us off our track and off our purpose. And that's what I want to relate it to today when it comes to money. So I want to talk about, have you ever really asked yourself, right, how to know if your money is fulfilling its primary purpose. Like money itself is just a thing. In fact, 1 Timothy 6:10 even talks about that, right? It talks about the love of money, not money itself. Money itself is neither good nor bad. And money is obviously a big part of our lives, okay? It's what I've done for nearly 2 decades. What many of us, whether we like it or not, whether we're in the arts, whether we're in sports, whether we're in business, whether we're in, government, it doesn't matter. If we're making an income and living in this world, money is a big part of our lives, whether we like it or not. And with that said, we have a tendency then, as human beings, to desire more of it. Pretty interesting, right? No matter what walk of life I've ever seen, I have clients in every industry, every sector I could think of, and all of them have a context around money because they need it. It has to happen. The way we pay for food, the way we pay for our necessities is through money. But what is money's actual primary purpose in your life? I want to give you a hint here as I talk about it. The primary purpose is income. Because if you have income coming in, then you can do what you need or want with your money. We also know this as cash flow. So it's important when we think about it, when we talk about investments, we talk about, income planning, that's its primary purpose. If you have the funnel and you've done your work to plan for all the different, funnels, if you will, of income coming in, then you can fulfill the primary purpose of money. But how do you decide how much is enough? I think achieving financial confidence starts with really 2 questions. The first one is how much actual income do you have coming in right now, wherever age or stage you're listening to me in right now, okay? How much money do you have coming in right now that you don't have to work to receive? I'm talking about actual dollars being deposited into your checking account or brokerage account. Now, before you go off on some tangent, like I'm going to be some social media influencer saying you have to have passive income, you should have 3 properties. I'm not talking about that necessarily, because many people listening right now have money they're working for and putting away that will replace their income. Think about Social Security. Think about pensions. So I'm not just saying you have to have some new age thing where it's passive income this and some side hustle that. No. I'm talking about all of that, as well as government benefits, as well as company benefits, Social Security, pension. Those matter because those are going to be the gap that we're trying to solve. That's the second question. If you quit working tomorrow, okay, let's say you retired or just quit working, how much money would you need to cover all of your expenses? This includes taxes, includes vacations, lifestyle expenses. If you're like most people, and most of my clients that I work with, there's a gap between how much income you're receiving now and how much you need. This is why we work, right? We work to fill that gap. And if you want to stop working at some point, whether it's becoming financially free in your 30s or 40s, or retiring in your 50s or 60s, or whatever it may be, you'll need to figure out how to close this gap with income, money's primary purpose in your life.
Stay connected. Get frequent updates on the show. Follow Brad Barrett and Make Your Money Matter on most social media platforms. And catch full episodes of Make Your Money Matter streaming now on our YouTube channel. To schedule your no-obligation appointment, go to onecapital.com or call 805-410-5454.
It's funny, I've shared this story before, but years ago I was invited to a lecture with a famed economist, and it was interesting because, the guy had 20 letters behind his name. He was MBA this and CFA that, and good Lord, the guy was just a pedigree amongst pedigrees, right? And he said what I thought was going to be the most profound thing ever, but it actually was super rudimentary, and I loved it, and I've shared it often. And he basically asked this room of all of us in there, he said, look, if I was a genie and I was going to say, you can have whatever rate of return you want on your investments, what number would you choose? Or what would you choose? Now, all of us started thinking for a second, and one person raised their hand and said 8%. The other guy said 10. One maybe said 20. And he's like, no, for real, anything you want. Someone raised their hand and said 1,000%. And he goes, here's the actual answer. It's not a number. It's a word. And he said, the word is more. It's a 4-letter word. Remember, as I said before, because money is a big part of our lives, we have a tendency, because we are human, we are flawed in all these ways, right? We have a tendency to desire more of it. So I always break it down for people struggling with this when it comes to how you decide how much is enough, is to answer those 2 questions. how much money you have coming in right now if you didn't have to work for it, and then what the gap is between you working and not working. And can your investments fill that gap? By the way, for any client listening right now, this is what we do as planners. Because when you hire an advisor, you're not just hiring them for performance. That's yesterday's news. It's all of it combined. The performance is an ongoing number, as well as the planning around what gap you're trying to fill. Because the gap you're trying to fill in your income versus when you want to, stop working versus your neighbors or your colleagues or your family members is going to be different. I've done this for nearly 20 years now, and I'm telling you, there's not been a single plan, even with employees in the same department or the same company, they're different. So just because you think they're all the same tier or the same level or the same job type or whatever it is, the gap is still very different because outside of the work life, you still have a personal life. You also have desires and goals and objectives and values and interests and hobbies and all things that are maybe different than that person. And when it comes to the investing side and the performance side, if investing in general was a ride at Six Flags, it would be the most nauseating roller coaster like ever, right? I mean, new investors or new clients, they'll often come in saying something along the lines of, hey, I started investing a couple months ago and now I'm losing money. What gives? They might even get discouraged and maybe even stop investing, which is really the wrong anecdote. And this is obviously dependent on their age and stage of where they're at. But, we think sometimes contextually, our brain wants to protect us, right? And it makes us feel like we have this rosy outlook, like investing is just going to be some smooth and predictable journey. Friends, if you don't know this already, it is not. The reality is, on any given year, it is anything but predictable. So by the way, if you're following on newsletters or social media outlets or news pundits that are having some predictions, just understand this. An economist said this a long time ago, and I always loved it. A good money manager's job is to be less wrong more often. We're going to be wrong. You are too. Everyone is. No one's perfect. Our job is to be less wrong more often. It's a game of probabilities. In fact, I don't even want to call it a game because it's not. I hate that terminology when someone says, oh, it's a game or it's a gambling or it's at the casino. It's not. It has to do with discipline. It has to do with patience. The most sophisticated investors in the world, in my opinion, with every resource at their fingertips, consistently fail. They fail at forecasting, what will happen in the stock market or in the coming months all the time, right? What we do know is this, is that the stock market has a long-term track record of generating positive returns to those who are patient. Patience is hard. Trust me, I get it. It's easy to do maybe in your middle career or early on when you can be more aggressive and like, oh, I got time to make it up. But it gets a little bit more, anxious, right? As you get older or some life events happen or you get closer to retirement, those kind of things. And this is where I really roll up my sleeves with clients and really say, look, you have to remember, the old adage of you should get more conservative as you get older is just that. It's an adage. It's a rule of thumb. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but be careful not to get trapped into that trap, if you will. Because here's what I'm trying to share. If you're 55 or 60 years old and you're retiring or you're looking to retire, let's just say, God willing, the same amount of time you have on the work or the job that you were doing, you'll have in retirement. With that said, hopefully you got 25 or 30 more years on this earth before God calls you back up. That's a long time period, wouldn't you say? So although retirement may seem like a finish line, it's actually the beginning to a new chapter. So understanding how your money is going to work for you in that season of life is very important because it's a very different season than the one when you're actively working. It's like going into summer wearing snow clothes as if you were still at the mountain. I mean, you just wouldn't do that, right? So you don't want to do that with your money either. Whatever you do, just don't jump off the roller coaster is what I'm trying to share, right? It's important to put it in context. Now, I've had some conversations lately. I brought this up last week as well, but I want to share something very openly that I've been discussing here internally at One Capital. I think this is really important. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and this is me, Brad Barrett, personally just saying this. I think in the next year or two, we're going to see some articles about how the S&P 500 may not be the right broad index of how the economy is doing anymore. I know that may sound like a bold statement, but here's why. If you look at the S&P 500 right now, as of the recording of this podcast, the S&P 500 total return is up 20.2%. Now, this is why this is so important. So note this, share this. You want to look really smart in front of your friends later. There's two things I'm going to bring to you that most people don't understand or know. The S&P 500 is a market capitalization weighted index. Sounds like a lot, but here, let me break this down for you. The S&P 500 index, basically it designates a percent weight to each company based on the value of its equity, which is otherwise known as market capitalization. Essentially, the bigger you are, the more weight you pull. So right now, of the 500 companies that are in the S&P 500, making it about a 20.2% rate of return as of year-to-date 2023 as the recording of this here in November of 2023, the equal weighted, which we can pull this, you can see this on certain data tracks, the equal weighted, so you take out the overweighted, you just weight every single one of those companies equally, the equal weighted rate of return as of, again, November 2023 is 5.3. So you're going, wait a minute, Brad, why is the S&P 500, what the media is telling me, is up 20% this year, but the equal weighted is only up 5? Let me share this with you. About 35%, friends, that is a huge number. About 35% of the S&P 500 is domiciled with around 10 companies. Think about the companies: Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla. These are the main companies that are propping up and holding up the S&P 500 as a positive return. This is a great example of what I want to share something very openly about concentration versus diversification. Now, our clients listening out there, we have many of those companies in your portfolio, but we don't own them at an overweighted position. So to bring context for a second, roughly, on average, all the companies that we may own that represent that large consortium of the S&P 500 maybe represents 2 or 3%, maybe 4% of a portfolio, whereas those companies represent almost 35% of the S&P 500. It's not a fair comparison. When we talk about the market, when someone says, oh, how's the market doing? What do you typically refer to? You're thinking of the S&P 500. You don't know that, but subliminally, that's what you've been marketed to by the media, and that's what they show. And when you look at it, you say, oh, it's up 20%. Then you look at your report and say, wait a minute, I'm only up 8%. What gives? Or 5%. What gives? Well, again, the broader index of how, quote unquote, the market is doing may not be the best indicator. I know it sounds crazy when I say that right now, but I just believe that unless something changes on the weighted index there, nothing's wrong per se. It's just we have an overweighted aspect to it. That performance is largely weighted by like 10 or 11 companies. That I don't think is compensatory to what we're actually looking for when it comes to an indicator of how the broader stock market is doing. So as I'm sharing, how to kind of look at your money from a purpose perspective, trying to stay in your lane with regards to just keeping, your eye on your own prize, if you will, you got to remember something that, what you're going to be doing with your money and what matters to you is going to be different than someone else. So if someone else is making a different rate of return than you, that may be okay as long as you understand the path that you're on. Wanting what someone else has is really one of the ways the Screwtape Letters talks about it, is one of the ways to deceive you and get you off course and make you feel less than. But that's not true. You're not less than. In no way, shape, or form. You're exactly who you're supposed to be, and you're doing exactly what you're going to be doing. You're called to be a good steward of your money. And if you're doing that, then you're being successful with it. That's just point blank. And I've said this before, but I'll go out on a limb that I'm fairly convinced that of nearly 19 years, almost 20 years doing this, that if you quote unquote leveled the playing field, if you will, and you gave everybody, $10,000 to start, I believe within 5 or 10 years, most of the people who are currently wealthy will be wealthy again, and those who are currently not wealthy or broke, let's say, would be broke again. Not all, but most. Friends, it's a mindset. It's not a position of where you're at with the money. It's a mindset. It's a discipline. Those are the things we need to employ when it comes to being a good steward of your money. Years ago, I was told this, and I always loved it. It was probably the most comforting thing I heard, and I wanted to share this. When God put a calling on your life, he already factored in your stupidity. Now, this was when I was a younger man, and, I was a prodigal son, if you will, and I remember a pastor and my dad telling me this one time. He said, when God put a calling in your life, he factored in your stupidity. Look, friends, we're all imperfect. No one's perfect, okay? So the mishaps you might be thinking of, the costs, if you will, of being in this world, remember, as I shared last week or week before as well, the cost isn't always a price tag. It's the things that we have to go through, the consequences, right? He's factored in the fact that we're not going to be perfect. And I think it's important as we look at our money, as we look at, our decisions we're making, is to not overreact, not underreact either, but just have good counsel. Find that person you can talk to, just have good dialogue with where your fears are, where your anxieties are, and then allow someone to bring some context to it. Because in our world right now, in the world we live in, as I shared at the top of the show, everything we have is at our fingertips. We are not at a lack of information. What we are is a lack of peace of mind. And the way we're being deceived, in my opinion, and I was reading this book, and it's a fictional book, but it has a lot to do with some truth to it, is being deceived in the wrong direction. And I guess I'll just end like this in what I said earlier. The one place in this expensive world that we can stay for free is our lane. And I guess more than that is being grateful and content with where we're at. Moving forward at the pace that makes sense for you may not be the pace that makes sense for someone else. So find your path, find your plan. And as always, I think an advisor is a great counsel when it comes to your money and putting this all together. Hey, I want to thank you for listening to the Make Your Money Matter show. As always, before acting on anything discussed today, speak with a financial advisor near you about your specific situation. Or again, if you'd like our help, you can reach us at 805-410-5454 or on our website at onecapital.com. And until next week, always remember to make your money matter.
The information in this show is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration a listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.